Welcome everyone to the Liverpool Daily News. I'm your host, David Comerford, and today we're going to be talking about a couple of midfielders that are on Liverpool's radar ahead of the summer transfer window, according to reports. And the first one, Ben, is Nicolo Barella from Inter Milan, and there's been a report that he could be available for a reduced price if Inter Milan don't make the Champions League, which is interesting because they're actually in the semi-finals, but it's a bit more of a struggle domestically. The report is that it could be 60 million if Inter don't make it, given their own financial demands. I mean, how big a bargain would that be for a player of Barella's quality?
I mean, 60 million, I hesitate to call it a bargain for any player. I mean, it's a lot of money,
Yeah.
but you're right to say in terms of, the caliber of player Liverpool could get for that price in this day and age. I guess you would have to call it a bargain. He's a very talented player. He's been pulling the strings for Inter, for the Italian national team as well. I think he played a key role in the Euros victory. And I think in terms of Liverpool, he's someone who is kind of perfect for that box to box number 8 role. He brings a lot of energy. I think his defensive qualities are kind of underrated, but at the same time, he also gives Liverpool something that they haven't really had maybe since Gini Ronaldo. I mean, he's the only one who I remember getting a few goals every now and again from midfield, and Liverpool haven't really had that. So I'd say Ronaldo's probably the last one. I mean, even though he wasn't necessarily a prolific goal scorer himself. I mean, if you have to go back, you'd probably go back to Gerrard for a prolific goal scorer. But Barella does have that ability to make an impact in the final third, probably more so than any other Liverpool midfielder that they have at their disposal at the moment.
And just on that, actually, we've seen in the last few games that Jordan Henderson playing in that kind of right-sided number 8 role has had a lot more attack and license with Trent moving in, stepping in alongside Fabinho, and Henderson's been able to almost push further up the pitch. Do you think that makes it sort of? I mean, how does that change Liverpool's kind of transfer approach this summer? Because you mentioned players like Barella there. I think Mason Mount's another one. These players who put up big attacking numbers. I mean, it's really exciting. This is to think of what they could sort of do in this Liverpool team if they're granted the level of license that we've seen Henderson given.
Yeah, it is. I think I think Barella tends to play on the left side of the midfield, so it'll be interesting to see him come to the right. But I think it is exciting. I think in terms of the profile of players Liverpool are targeting, Mount and Barella, like you mentioned, are very similar in the sense that they press high from the front, defend well from the front as well, and obviously get into these creative positions where they can make an impact in the final third. So I think that's going to be interesting to see because, as we've talked about for years now, Liverpool have relied heavily on Trent Alexander-Arnold being the creative presence in the team. And obviously, at a certain time, that's going to become predictable. The recent switch to midfield has made Liverpool certainly more unpredictable. But, you can't just rely on one presence in the middle of the park or on the at right back to create all the chances for you and to be the main source, the main outlet. So you are going to have to spread that out a bit more. And I think if someone like Barella comes in, he would be able to do that.
And just one last thing on him before we move on. 60 million, obviously, like you say, not a bargain in its own right, but maybe a little bit less than you pay for a couple of the players based in the Premier League, the likes of Caicedo, McAllister, maybe Declan Rice as well. But who do you want to see now that Liverpool aren't getting Bellingham? Who would you want to see as the most expensive, and what's the big headline midfield addition this summer? Would Barella be that person?
I think so. I mean, that's a tough question. There's a lot of good midfielders out there, but I think Barella is up there among the top ones that you'd like to see come in. Maybe potentially a bit above Mount, I would say. I mean, I know Mount probably has the advantage of being homegrown, but Barella is certainly having the better season, and I think he's been really good in the past few seasons, even though Inter haven't been that good anyway. In Serie A, at least, I mean, they've been good in the Champions League. So I think, yeah, he's up there. I think he's like top tier in terms of the kind of midfielders Liverpool should be targeting.
I think he's flown a little bit under the radar as well, given how good he's been. To be fair, in terms of having that kind of, I know Italy obviously won the Euros, but in terms of having that sort of profile across Europe and generating that excitement, maybe deserves a bit more. One last comment actually on Barella from one of the viewers before we move on. It's the Italian thing that worries me. Not many players from Italy make an impact in the Premier League. I mean, is there a concern in terms of the sort of Serie A to Premier League transition in terms of style of play, do you think?
I mean, I think Serie A is getting stronger. Like before, when I think maybe 10 years ago, when maybe Akolani was coming to Liverpool, I think he's the one who sort of spread that bad reputation
Yeah.
around Liverpool fans of Italian players. I think the league wasn't as strong, but certainly now, I think in the last 5 years, the league is getting really strong again, and you see that right now. I mean, the Italian, in terms of who's still left in the Champions League, in the Europa League, and the Europa Conference League, the Italians have the most teams still competing for the trophies. And on top of that, I mean, we've seen Mohamed Salah come in from Serie A. I know he had a bit of a Premier League experience, but that wasn't necessarily a successful Premier League experience, and he's settled in well. And there's been a few examples of that. So I think it's all dependent on the player, and I think Barella is someone who is suited to the Premier League. He's got the energy, he's got the physical attributes, even though he's quite small, but he does get active in the physical side of things, and he can hold his own in that sense as well. So I think I'm not necessarily worried about that aspect.
Yeah, I think, sometimes you can look at a player's height and it can be quite reductive. I mean, the one I always come back to, or there's a couple, Bernardo Silva and N'Golo Kante, very, very
Mm.
small players, but they, like you say, they more than hold their own when it comes to the physical side of the game. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens on the Barella front moving forward. The other player we want to talk about today is Yunus Musah, American international, plays for Valencia. He's been linked. There was a report from 90 Min that Liverpool, one of the Premier League teams, interested in him, alongside Chelsea, Arsenal, I think Newcastle, and maybe Brighton too on that, as well as a few clubs in Europe. Valencia are actually, we associate them as the club who kind of, obviously Rafael Benitez came from there. I think he won La Liga once or twice with them. And they've always been kind of up there this season. They're actually in a relegation battle, so not surprised to see Liverpool maybe sniffing around to see if they can get a reduced price because of that. He was a player who impressed for the United States at the World Cup. Obviously, they only got to the last 16, but he certainly made an impact still. What do you think of Musah? And crucially, do you think that he's Liverpool level? And if he does come in, is he someone to look at as more of a depth player, certainly at first?
That's a tricky question. I mean, at the World Cup, he was awesome. It was amazing. And before that as well for Valencia, he was in a really good run of form. Valencia were doing all right as well, not necessarily struggling as they are now. But I think now in the last sort of few months, he hasn't been as impressive as he was. I mean, obviously Valencia haven't been as good either. So he's not necessarily someone in form. But when he is, I mean, he's the type of player who suits Klopp's style of play perfectly. He's got a lot of energy about him. He can cover so many positions. I mean, he's played everywhere pretty much in his senior career. Even he's played as a wing back. He's played on the right side of midfield, the left side of midfield. He's played as a holding midfielder. He's played as a box to box midfielder, and even as a number 10. So, he can do it all. He's very versatile in that sense, and the energy he brings as well I think is important. Technically, he's gifted. He's good on the ball. He can get past players. He's really good at progressing the ball through carries. So I think even in the defensive aspect, I think he's quite strong defensively. He's good in the tackle, hard to beat, hard to go around. And on top of that, I think what people forget is counts as homegrown because he grew up in
Arsenal's
England
academy, yeah.
and he came through Arsenal's academy. So in that sense, maybe some other teams in Europe probably don't value him as much, but for Liverpool, his value increases because of that homegrown factor. And still only young. I think he was born in 2002, so around 2021. So I think he ticks a lot of boxes. I don't know if he's going to be a regular starter, but Liverpool tend to rotate the midfield a lot. So I think he's going to be someone who's probably going to get at least 30 to 35 games a season in the Premier League.
And just as you were talking there, it occurred to me that I suppose there's also a commercial appeal to signing a player from the US. I suppose Liverpool, obviously, with American owners and often going on American, preseason tours, it can have an advantage from that standpoint. And these things will, I suppose, be considered. I mean, when I was looking into it, you mentioned it there, it was the ball carrying that really stood out as the kind of area where he's really exceptional, and he actually profiles very similar to Mateus Nunes. So I was wondering if it was almost kind of the cheaper alternative to him, because we've seen Liverpool cool on him a little bit, according to reports. So he does look very exciting, and I think Liverpool have got players who can beat a man in midfield. Jones and Elliott can do that, but they don't really have anyone as a proper, energetic, dynamic ball carrier, which I think Musah could be. One last question before we finish. There was a report yesterday from James Pearce of The Athletic that Liverpool might only sign two. It was 2 or 3 midfielders, but he suggested there might only be 2. Is there a scenario in which that's enough, or is it going to have to be sort of 3 for Liverpool to properly address this midfield?
I mean, I think my preference would probably be 3. But if there is 2, we talked about Musah and Barella, and I'm not sure if that's enough, even though they're both really talented players. I just think in terms of their profiles, I mean, Barella is more of an offensive player, even though he does bring a lot to the defensive side of the game. Musah is more of a box-to-box player. And I think for me, even though Bajcetic has come in and he's done well in the holding midfield position, I see him more as a number 8, not necessarily a sole holding with someone who can play that number 6 role on his own. Maybe in a double 6 he can, but not necessarily Fabinho replacement for me. And obviously with Fabinho's struggles, I really think a key area that Liverpool have to address is to find a Fabinho replacement, a holding midfielder who's a ball winner, who reads the game well, and who can be that sort of protection in front of the back four. So I think that has to be addressed, and I think for me that would be the number 1 target, the primary sort of area that Liverpool should look at and bring in someone who can do that role.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I think I agree. I think you need another number 6 in the squad. You need someone who can replace Henderson in that right-sided role, and you need someone who can play that Thiago role as well, because much as when he's fit, I think he's pretty much a perfect option there, Thiago. It is quite it's quite common to see him obviously missing games, so Liverpool have to kind of better protect themselves against that. But that'll do us for this morning. Thanks very much, Ben. Remember to check out all the written content that goes up on liverpool.com today, and tomorrow morning we'll be back with another stream. But yeah, enjoy the rest of your day.